Attention! You are about to learn a true story, a story that remained hidden for decades, an account based on rare documents, forgotten testimonies, and archives that almost disappeared. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you appreciate historical stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Now, turn up the volume, turn off notifications, and come with me on this investigation. The folder had been sitting in the National Archives for over 50 years, yellowed with age, its edges frayed, labeled simply, Red Tail Integration Report. Classified. It was discovered during a routine digitization project in 2003. The archivist who found it had no idea what lay inside. No idea that these pages would reveal a chapter of history both uncomfortable and inspiring. The year was 1942. America had been at war for little more than 6 months. In the skies over Europe, Allied pilots fought desperately against the German Luftwaffe. Every trained pilot was needed. Every plane was precious. Yet back in the United States, hundreds of highly trained aviators were being kept from combat for one reason only: the color of their skin. They were the men of the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen. The first African-American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces. Their very existence was considered an experiment. Many high-ranking officers expected them to fail, wanted them to fail. What these documents revealed, however, was something never fully acknowledged in official histories. The resistance they faced came not only from their fellow Americans, it came from their allies as well. Specifically, from the British Royal Air Force pilots they would eventually fight alongside. The first document in the folder was a report dated April 3, 1943. It detailed the initial reaction when word reached the RAF that black American pilots would be joining the fight in the Mediterranean theater. Integration concerns have been raised by British squadron commanders, the report stated. Questions about combat readiness and ability to coordinate with established units have been noted. Request guidance on how to proceed. Behind this formal language lay a starker reality, one revealed in personal letters and diary entries collected decades later. Flight Lieutenant William Harrison of the RAF's 254th Squadron wrote to his brother, "Word came down that we're to be joined by a colored squadron from the States. The chaps are taking bets on how long they'll last. Simpson gives them 2 weeks. I'm more generous, perhaps a month." Colonel Harold Spencer, the white American officer tasked with facilitating the integration, kept meticulous notes. His private assessment was blunt. British concerns mirror our own. They doubt the men's abilities. They question their courage under fire. They worry about complications in shared facilities. I have assured them this is temporary, a political necessity that will likely be brief. What none of them knew was that the men they so casually dismissed had already overcome obstacles far greater than enemy fire. The training program at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama was designed to be nearly impossible. The washout rate was deliberately high. Every test was scrutinized, every mistake magnified. The men who emerged from this crucible were not merely qualified, they were exceptional. Lieutenant James Roberts was one of those men. His personnel file included in the archive showed perfect scores in navigation, aerial gunnery, and formation flying. His instructor, a white officer from Georgia, had written simply, "Reluctantly recommend for combat duty. Candidate shows necessary proficiency." That grudging endorsement would soon be tested in the skies over Italy. The first meeting between the Tuskegee Airmen and their British counterparts occurred at Capodichino Airfield near Naples in early 1944. The weather that day was clear and cool. Mediterranean sunshine bathed the runways. Perfect flying weather. Captain Benjamin Davis, Jr., commander of the 332nd, led a delegation of his officers to meet with RAF Wing Commander Percival Hawkins. The official transcript of the meeting is revealing in what it does not contain. No welcome, No expressions of solidarity, just terse operational details. "Your squadron will be housed in the eastern section," Hawkins stated. "Briefings are at 0500 hours daily. Combat air patrol schedules will be posted weekly. You will initially fly secondary support missions until your capabilities can be assessed." Between the lines, the message was clear. The black pilots were not expected to handle primary combat responsibilities. They would be kept away from the most critical operations. What the official transcript does not include is the exchange that followed. It was recorded only in Davis's personal diary, discovered by his son in 1987. "After the formal meeting, a British flight lieutenant approached me," Davis wrote. "He asked, with no attempt to hide his skepticism, whether any of us had actually seen combat before. When I said no, he smiled and said, 'Well, we'll see how your boys hold up when the real shooting starts, won't we?' Davis's response was measured. I assured him we would do our duty. He laughed and rejoined his fellows. I overheard the word minstrel as they walked away. The accommodations assigned to the Tuskegee Airmen were substandard. While other squadrons were housed in renovated villas, the men of the 332nd were placed in tent quarters at the far edge of the airfield. Their maintenance facilities were the farthest from the main hangar. Their aircraft, P-47 Thunderbolts, were older models with higher flight hours than those assigned to other units. The message could not have been clearer. They were not expected to last long. Their presence was seen as a formality, perhaps a political gesture, but not a serious military contribution. Lieutenant Roberts wrote home to his wife during this period. His letter, preserved in the archives, reveals both frustration and determination. "The British pilots barely acknowledge us," he wrote. "They call us the American experiment when they think we can't hear. Yesterday, one asked if we were supposed to be ground crew who had stolen planes. I wanted to knock his teeth out. But the captain reminds us daily, we fight with our planes, not our fists. Our orders are clear. We fly, we fight, we prove them wrong." Prove them wrong they would, but first would come the waiting, the secondary missions, the routine patrols far from enemy territory, until fate and the necessities of war intervened. It happened on April 18, 1944. The mission was supposed to be simple, a routine escort of transport planes delivering supplies to forward bases, the kind of mission given to untested units, safe, predictable, far from the primary action. What no one expected was the appearance of 12 Messerschmitt 109 fighters coming out of the sun at 20,000 feet. The official after-action report is a model of military brevity. Enemy aircraft engaged at 10:37 hours, 2 transports damaged. Escort fighters engaged, 4 enemy aircraft confirmed destroyed, 2 probable, 1 escort aircraft lost. What this sterile language fails to capture is the chaos and courage of those moments. The German fighters had expected easy targets. They found instead a squadron ready to prove itself. Lieutenant Roberts, flying as Red 3, recorded his experience in his combat log. "Enemy aircraft appeared high and from the east, no warning from ground control. I broke formation to intercept the lead element of 4 Messerschmitts diving on transport Baker, executed a climbing turn to 6 o'clock position on trailing enemy aircraft, opened fire at approximately 200 yards, observed strikes on fuselage and wing route. Enemy aircraft emitted smoke and broke off attack, pursued and confirmed destruction when pilot bailed out at 8,000 feet. What Roberts did not include in his official report was what happened when he landed. This was recorded in a letter to his brother, found decades later in a family collection. The British pilots were watching when we returned. They counted our planes as we landed. When they realized we had downed 4 enemy fighters while losing only 1 of our own, their expressions changed. Not enough to approach us, not enough to offer congratulations, but enough that the smirks disappeared. The one pilot lost that day was Second Lieutenant Marcus Williams. His plane was last seen pursuing 2 Messerschmitts toward the coast. Neither his aircraft nor his body was ever recovered. He became the first combat casualty of the 332nd. At the evening briefing, Wing Commander Hawkins made his first direct reference to the squadron's performance. The transcript reads simply, "Adequate response to enemy action by all units involved. Commendation to Lieutenant Roberts for quick action that prevented transport losses. Adequate, a single word that revealed volumes. Not excellent, not outstanding, merely adequate." Yet even this reluctant acknowledgement represented progress. The following day, a new mission was posted. The Tuskegee Airmen were assigned to escort bombers targeting rail yards near Rome. It was not a secondary mission. It was the main effort of the day. A test, perhaps. Or simply the recognition that in war, necessity often overcomes prejudice. The next weeks brought more missions, more opportunities, more evidence that could not be ignored. On May 7, 1944, 16 P-47 Thunderbolts of the 332nd escorted 25 B-24 Liberators on a bombing run to the Ploesti oil fields in Romania. It was one of the most dangerous targets in Europe. German fighters swarmed to protect this vital resource. The combat was intense. The official record states heavy enemy resistance encountered, 15+ enemy aircraft engaged, 8 confirmed destroyed, 4 probables. All bombers returned to base, 3 escort aircraft damaged, all returned. What made this mission remarkable was not just the number of enemy aircraft destroyed, it was that not a single bomber was lost. In a war where bomber crews expected 10% losses per mission as normal, this was extraordinary. A gunner on one of the B-24s later wrote in his memoir, "We'd been told we were getting the colored squadron as escort. Some of the boys groaned. Then we saw what they could do. A Messerschmitt came straight at us. One of the red-tailed P-47s rolled in behind him so fast I could hardly believe it. 3-second burst. The German bird exploded." After that, nobody on my crew ever complained about our escorts again. The first documented evidence of changing British attitudes came in a weekly assessment report dated May 12, 1944. Wing Commander Hawkins wrote, "The American 332nd has performed beyond initial expectations. Their formation discipline is excellent. Combat results consistent with experienced units. Recommend continued integration with primary mission assignments. Beyond initial expectations." The careful wording revealed the low bar that had been set, but it was changing. A British pilot, Flight Lieutenant Thomas Witherspoon, recorded in his diary an encounter in the officers' mess that evening. "Spencer asked what we thought of the Yanks' colored squadron now. Dunham started to make some joke, but Caldwell cut him off. 'They can fly,' he said. 'Whatever else they may be, they can bloody well fly.'" The table went quiet after that. It's rather difficult to maintain certain attitudes when the chaps in question keep saving your friends' lives. You're keeping up so far? If this story is touching you, help us bring it to more people. A like makes a difference. A comment motivates us. A share multiplies our reach. And if you're not subscribed yet, join our community. Now we return to the moment when everything really started to change. The turning point came on June 4, 1944. A mission to provide cover for the Allied landings at Anzio, the largest air operation in the Mediterranean theater to date. Every available fighter was called into service. The Tuskegee Airmen were assigned to fly alongside the RAF's 185th Squadron. Not as a separate unit, but integrated into a combined force, it was unprecedented. The squadron briefing that morning was tense. The official minutes record only the operational details, takeoff times, patrol sectors, recognition signals. What they do not capture is the atmosphere in the room. Flight Lieutenant William Harrison, the British pilot who had earlier written dismissively of the American squadron, later described it in a letter discovered among his personal effects after his death in 1992. "We sat on one side of the room, they on the other," he wrote. The wing commander looked at all of us and said simply, "Today, gentlemen, you fly together, or you die alone." There was nothing more to be said after that. The mission itself was chaotic. The German Luftwaffe mounted a major effort to disrupt the landings. More than 60 enemy aircraft engaged the Allied fighters in a swirling battle that ranged from sea level to 25,000 feet. The combat record shows the 332nd claimed 11 confirmed kills that day. The RAF squadron claimed 9. Together, they prevented a single enemy bomber from reaching the invasion fleet. What changed everything was what happened at 14:22 hours. Flight Lieutenant Harrison's Spitfire was damaged by cannon fire from a Focke-Wulf 190. His aircraft was streaming fuel. He was losing altitude over enemy territory. His radio transmission, preserved in the combat logs, was calm but final. "Taking fire, controls damaged, will attempt to reach water." Then something unexpected happened. 2 P-47s with distinctive red tails broke formation and descended with him. One positioned itself between Harrison and the pursuing German fighter. The combat record identifies these pilots as Lieutenant James Roberts and Lieutenant William Porter of the 332nd. Roberts engaged the Focke-Wulf, driving it away from the damaged Spitfire. Porter flew alongside Harrison, guiding him toward Allied lines. When Harrison's engine finally failed 5 miles from the coast, Porter stayed with him as he glided toward a crash landing in a field, then circled overhead until rescue units arrived. Harrison survived. His official report acknowledged survival only possible due to intervention of American escort pilots who remained despite risk to their own aircraft and personal safety. That evening, something remarkable happened in the officers' mess. It was recorded not in any official document, but in multiple personal accounts later collected by military historians. The British pilots of the 185th Squadron entered the mess as a group. They walked directly to the table where the pilots of the 332nd were seated separately, as had become the custom. Flight Lieutenant Caldwell, the senior officer present, spoke first. "Gentlemen," he said, "we would be honored if you would join us for dinner." The segregation in the officers' mess ended that night. Not by order, not by regulation, but by the voluntary recognition of shared courage and professional respect. There was, however, an official narrative being crafted that differed from reality. This became clear when reviewing documents from higher headquarters during this period. A command summary dated June 20th, 1944, sent to the War Department in Washington, made no mention of the initial segregation or friction between units. Instead, it presented a sanitized version. Integration of colored fighter units has proceeded according to plan. Operational effectiveness maintained at expected levels. Morale remains high among all units. This official history was already being written to obscure the truth. The prejudice, the skepticism, the segregated facilities, all were being erased from the record. What would remain was a more comfortable narrative of seamless cooperation from the beginning. Yet the men who lived through it knew differently. They remembered the slights, the doubts, the separate dining facilities, the substandard housing, and they remembered how it changed, not through orders or policies, but through performance under fire. By July of 1944, the situation had transformed. An operations order from that period assigns missions without reference to the racial composition of units. Combat assignments were distributed based solely on availability and capability. The 332nd was no longer given secondary missions. They were, in the language of the time, fully operational and integrated into the command structure. Flight Lieutenant Harrison, the British pilot whose life had been saved by Roberts and Porter, became an unexpected bridge between the squadrons. His personal log contains this entry from July 10th. "Flew practice interception mission with Roberts today. His technique on the high-side pass is remarkable. Have adopted several of his suggestions. The Americans have developed tactics that complement our own. We are learning from each other. What remained unacknowledged in the official record was how complete the reversal of attitudes had become. This was captured instead in the personal correspondence of the period. A letter from an unnamed RAF pilot to his family, dated July 28, 1944, states, "The Yanks with the red tails are our good luck charm now. The boys request them as escort whenever possible. Their reputation has spread to other bomber groups as well. Everyone wants the red tails. Good luck charm." The very squadron that had been mocked, doubted and segregated just months earlier was now requested by name. Their distinctive red-painted tail sections, originally an identification marker, had become a symbol of protection and excellence. But the official history would record none of this transformation. The narrative being constructed was one of seamless Allied cooperation from the beginning. The uncomfortable truth was being systematically obscured. It was 1972, almost 3 decades after these events. America had changed. The civil rights movement had transformed the legal landscape. The military had been officially desegregated by executive order in 1948. But the full story of the Tuskegee Airmen, particularly their treatment by British allies, remained largely untold. Thomas Jenkins, a military historian at Howard University, began investigating the wartime experience of black military personnel. His initial focus was not on the Tuskegee Airmen specifically, but on the broader African-American experience in World War II. What he found in declassified mission reports and unit histories were inconsistencies, references to initial operational integration challenges without explanation, mentions of separate billeting for administrative purposes without context, the kind of bureaucratic language that often conceals uncomfortable truths. Jenkins submitted a Freedom of Information request for all records related to the 332nd Fighter Group's deployment to the Mediterranean theater. The response took 18 months. When it came, it was heavily redacted. Entire sections were blacked out under the justification of diplomatic sensitivity. Diplomatic sensitivity. In records nearly 30 years old, the phrase itself was revealing. Jenkins then took a different approach. He began contacting surviving members of the squadron. Many had gone on to distinguished careers after the war, though often facing continued discrimination despite their service. Through their personal papers, letters and diaries, a different history emerged. Colonel Benjamin Davis, Jr., by then retired, granted Jenkins an interview in 1974. The transcript reveals his measured assessment. "The official record doesn't capture what we experienced," Davis stated. "The reports talk about integration and cooperation because that was the acceptable narrative. The reality was that we had to earn every bit of respect we received. It wasn't given freely, not by our own military and not by our allies. But once earned, that respect was genuine and lasting." Jenkins also located Flight Lieutenant William Harrison, by then living in Surrey, England. Harrison's perspective had evolved considerably from his initial dismissive comments about the American experiment. "We were wrong," Harrison acknowledged in a recorded interview, "embarrassingly, unforgivably wrong in our assumptions. By the end of the campaign, we measured other units against the standard set by the 332nd. They were simply the best escort group in the theater. Everyone knew it, even if no one officially acknowledged the irony." Through these personal accounts, Jenkins began to reconstruct the true narrative. Not the sanitized version of harmonious cooperation, but the more complex reality of prejudice overcome through demonstrated excellence. His findings were published in the Journal of Military History in 1976. The article, titled "The Red Tail Reputation, a Reassessment of Allied Integration in the Mediterranean Theater," received little mainstream attention. But within academic and military history circles, it began a re-evaluation of the official narrative. What Jenkins could not access, however, were the classified British records from the period. Those would remain sealed for another decade, protecting not military secrets, but institutional embarrassment. In 1984, under the British 30-year rule for declassification, the first Royal Air Force documents relating to the integration of the Tuskegee Airmen became available to researchers. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington of the Imperial War Museum in London was among the first to review these materials. What she discovered was a trove of internal communications that revealed the extent of initial resistance to the Black American Squadron. One memo from Air Vice Marshal Walter Lenton to subordinate commanders dated March 12, 1944, was particularly revealing. The arrival of the American Colored Fighter Squadron presents certain challenges for integration with our forces. While official policy requires full cooperation, field commanders are advised to use discretion in facility allocation and mission assignments. Initial segregation of messing and recreational facilities is advised to prevent unnecessary friction. This arrangement should be presented as administrative rather than discriminatory in nature. Administrative rather than discriminatory. The careful language masked the intent to keep the squadrons separate while maintaining the appearance of integration. Another document, a weekly intelligence assessment from April 23, 1944, contained this observation. American Negro Squadron continues to perform adequately in limited engagements. Some concern remains about performance under sustained pressure or in situations requiring complex tactical coordination. Recommend continued assignment to secondary theaters and support missions. This assessment came just days after the Tuskegee Airmen had successfully defended transport aircraft against superior enemy forces. The disconnect between performance and evaluation was stark. What was most significant in these newly declassified records was how rapidly the assessments changed over the following weeks. By June, the same intelligence officer who had recommended secondary theaters was writing, 332nd Squadron performance metrics now exceed theater averages in all categories. Particularly notable is their bomber escort efficiency, with lowest loss rates recorded among all escort groups. Tactical discipline exceptional. Dr. Harrington compiled these findings in a monograph published by the Imperial War Museum titled Changing Assessments, the RAF and the Tuskegee Airmen. The publication marked the first official British acknowledgement of the prejudice faced by the Black American pilots and the excellence with which they overcame it. This research reached a limited academic audience, but it came to the attention of filmmaker Stanley Roberts, who had been developing a documentary on African Americans in World War II. Roberts recognized that here was a story that needed to be told more broadly. He began the difficult process of locating surviving members of both the Tuskegee Airmen and the British squadrons they flew alongside. Many had passed away. Others were elderly and scattered across 2 continents. But through persistent effort, Roberts assembled a remarkable collection of first-hand accounts. Lieutenant James Roberts, by then in his 70s, spoke on camera for the first time about his experiences. "We knew what they thought of us," he said. "We could read it in their eyes, hear it in their tone. We didn't need to be told. But we also knew how to change minds, not with words or complaints, but with performance. Every mission was a test, every sortie a chance to prove ourselves. And gradually, mission by mission, we saw the change. The nods of recognition, the professional respect. By the end, we weren't the colored squadron. We were just the best damn pilots in the theater." The documentary aired on public television in 1987. Titled Red Tail Reputations, it presented for the first time to a general audience the story of how the Tuskegee Airmen had overcome prejudice from both American and British allies. The film included interviews with surviving pilots from both sides and historical footage never before broadcast. The response was immediate and significant. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and military historians all recognized the importance of this corrected narrative. The documentary won several awards and was added to educational curricula. Perhaps most significantly, it prompted further declassification of records. In 1988, under congressional pressure, the United States Air Force released previously classified performance evaluations and command assessments of the 332nd Fighter Group. These documents contained the statistical validation of what the pilots had always known. The Tuskegee Airmen had compiled one of the most impressive combat records of any fighter group in the European theater. Missions flown, 1,578 enemy aircraft destroyed, 112 confirmed bombers lost while under their escort. Remarkably few compared to other groups' decorations awarded, including Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Stars, and Purple Hearts. The statistics told part of the story. But what emerged more clearly through personal accounts was how the Tuskegee Airmen had changed minds, how their performance had forced a reconsideration of deep-seated prejudices. Flight Lieutenant Thomas Witherspoon, one of the last surviving British pilots who had flown alongside the 332nd, gave an interview to the London Times in 1989. His assessment was blunt. "We were products of our time and our societies," he acknowledged. "The prejudices we carried were wrong, but they were real. What changed us wasn't orders or policies. It was watching these men fly, watching them fight, watching them risk their lives for the same cause we believed in." By the end of the war, the color of their skin had become irrelevant. What mattered was the color of their aircraft tails. Red, the color of excellence. Excellence. The word appeared repeatedly in the accounts of those who had witnessed the squadron's performance. Not qualified excellence, not excellence despite their background, simply excellence by any standard of measurement. As these accounts and records became public, they forced a re-evaluation of not just the Tuskegee Airmen, but of the sanitized history that had been constructed around race relations during the war. The comfortable narrative of seamless Allied cooperation gave way to the more complex, but ultimately more inspiring story of prejudice, overcome through demonstrated ability. This reassessment gained official recognition in 1991 when the Royal Air Force Museum at Hendon installed a permanent exhibit titled Red Tails, the RAF and the Tuskegee Airmen. The exhibit acknowledged for the first time in an official British institution the initial prejudice and eventual respect that characterized the relationship. The folder discovered in the National Archives in 2003 contained one final document of significance. Dated August 15, 1944, it was a personal letter from Wing Commander Percival Hawkins to Colonel Benjamin Davis, Jr. It had never been sent. The letter was found in Hawkins' personal papers after his death and had been included in the classified file during a 1961 review of wartime race relations. It reads, in part, "I must acknowledge what I have been reluctant to put into writing. The officers and men under your command have performed in a manner that has caused me to reconsider long-held beliefs. When you arrived at Capodichino, I harbored significant doubts about your squadron's capabilities. These doubts were based not on evidence, but on prejudice. I freely admit this now. Your pilots have proven themselves not merely adequate, not merely equal, but in many respects superior in their discipline, courage, and skill. The tactics your squadron has developed for close bomber escort are being adopted throughout this command. This is an acknowledgement I never expected to make, but professional integrity demands it. I have not sent this letter through official channels, as I believe such an admission might be misconstrued or exploited for political purposes. I offer it instead as a personal acknowledgement between officers. The letter was never sent. Hawkins may have thought better of putting such thoughts on paper, even in a personal communication, or perhaps he found the courage to express these sentiments in person. The historical record does not tell us. What we do know is that by the end of the war, the Tuskegee Airmen had compiled a record that spoke for itself. Their performance had not just met expectations, it had redefined them. The prejudice they faced, from both American and British sources, had not disappeared entirely, but it had been confronted by irrefutable evidence of excellence. The story of how British pilots mocked the Black Tuskegee Airmen until they dominated the skies is not merely a footnote in military history. It is a testament to how performance can overcome prejudice, how excellence can challenge assumptions, how courage can transcend boundaries of race and nationality. The men of the 332nd Fighter Group returned to an America still deeply segregated. Many faced continued discrimination despite their distinguished service. It would be years before their full contribution was properly acknowledged. Decades before the complexity of their experience, including the prejudice they faced from allies, was honestly addressed. Their legacy lives on in the changed institutions they helped transform. The United States Air Force, desegregated in 1949, counts the Tuskegee Airmen among its most honored predecessors. The Royal Air Force acknowledges them as respected allies who influenced tactical development and challenged social preconceptions. But perhaps their most important legacy is the simple, powerful lesson their story teaches. Excellence cannot be denied. Performance speaks louder than prejudice. Courage knows no color. The question remains, why was this story suppressed for so long? Why did official histories omit the initial prejudice and the journey to respect? The answer lies partly in institutional embarrassment. Neither the American nor British military establishments were eager to acknowledge their biases. The sanitized version of seamless Allied cooperation was simpler and more comfortable. It lies partly in the politics of the time. During and immediately after the war, acknowledging discrimination against black servicemen might have been seen as damaging to morale or Allied relations, and it lies partly in the broader societal reluctance to confront issues of race honestly. It was easier to celebrate the Tuskegee Airmen's achievements without examining the obstacles unnecessarily placed in their path by the very institutions they served. The full story of prejudice confronted and overcome through demonstrated excellence is ultimately more powerful than the sanitized version. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of performance over preconception, to the capacity for growth and change, even in the midst of war. The pilots of the 332nd knew this truth. They lived it daily. Each mission was both a military operation and a demonstration. Each successful return a rebuttal to low expectations. Each saved bomber an argument for equality. Flight Lieutenant William Harrison, the British pilot saved by Tuskegee Airmen, perhaps summarized it best in his final interview before his death in 1992. "I began the war with one set of beliefs about people. I ended it with another. Those men in the red-tailed aircraft taught me something more valuable than tactics or technique. They taught me to question my assumptions, to judge people by their actions, not my preconceptions. It's a lesson I've carried throughout my life, and one I've tried to pass on to my children and grandchildren. Look for excellence wherever it may be found. You might be surprised where you discover it. Excellence wherever it may be found, a lesson taught in the skies over Europe, demonstrated under fire, proven beyond question. A lesson as relevant today as it was then. End of narrative." This story, like so many others, was almost forgotten. Your support ensures we continue to rescue these accounts. If you enjoyed it, leave your like. Comment what you thought. Share with those who also appreciate real history, and explore our channel. There are more cases waiting for you. I'll see you in the next episode.